Hello, and this is my first vlog on skills versus capacities in the weight room. And today we're going to have Faris, who's going to be my athlete, who's going to be limited by capacity. And my second athlete is going to be George, who is going to be limited by skill in both the squat and the deadlift. Before analysing the movements, it's important to define differences between a skill limitation and a capacity limitation. Skill refers to coordination, timing, and movement sequencing. A skill-limited athlete understands the goal but cannot organise their body efficiently to perform it. They may lose balance, miss timed joint actions, or show inconsistent technique. Skill limitation typically improves with cueing, technical drills, or practice. In this assessment, George represents a skill-limited mover. Capacity refers to physical ability to perform movement, including strength, mobility, neurotension, and tissue tolerance. In this assessment, Faris represents a capacity-limited movement. This is Faris's bodyweight squat. Straight away we can see asymmetry as he sits deeper into his left hip, while his right hip maintains a higher position. There is also a slight valgus tendency at the right knee on ascent. Because this happens even without load, it points to a capacity limitation on the right side rather than a technical error. With the annotations, we can clearly see postural differences. His left knee tracks clearly over his toes, while the right knee collapses slightly inwards. Despite this, he maintains an upright torso, meaning he understands the movement, but his body chooses the path of least resistance. This again reinforces the issue is capacity-based, not skill-based. When we add a barbell, even without load, the asymmetries increase. He shifts more onto his left side and the right knee valgus becomes more pronounced at the sticking point. His torso remains stable, so there is a skill there, but the right side cannot tolerate the same load or range. Load exposes capacity limitations more clearly. To address the suspected right side posterior chain restriction, we use neurodynamic sliding or hamstring flossing. Research shows that neurodynamic sliding can improve hamstring flexibility more effectively than static stretching by increasing neuromobility rather than just muscle length. Two studies have both found significant improvements in straight leg raise and hip flexion after neuromobilization. This makes flossing highly appropriate for restoring hip flexion tolerance and reducing protective stiffness. The two pictures below show differences between two limbs. Faris's left leg moves smoothly through a larger range of motion, while his right leg reaches end range earlier with more stiffness. This confirms a unilateral neural and or posterior chain capacity limitation. It directly explains why the right hip stays higher during the squat. After the interventions, we retested Faris using a heel block. Heel elevation decreases ankle dorsiflexion demand and reduces forward trunk lean, which improves squat mechanics during rehabilitation. Two studies showed that heel lifts increase stability and optimize joint angles during squatting. Here we can see a more balanced squat pattern and reduced compensation on the right side. By comparing the two positions side by side, the improvements are clear. With heel elevation, his knee tracking becomes more symmetrical, hip depth is more even, and the bar stays more central. This shows that once we reduce the mechanical demand and improve capacity, his movement quality improves without technical cueing. Again, this is consistent with a capacity limitation rather than a skill issue. In the deadlift, we see a similar pattern. The right hip contributes less during the initial pull, leading to early spinal flexion and the hips rising faster than the torso. He struggles to create symmetrical tension, which suggests limited posterior chain compatibility on the right side. This is not a misunderstanding of technique, it's an inability to express force evenly. We then use unilateral glute bridges to target right side hip extension. Glute bridges produce high levels of gluteus maximus activation and are effective for improving hip strength. Netto et al. 2020 found that bridge variations elicit high glute activation and flex knee positions biased the glutes over the hamstrings. Here, Faris shows a stronger, more stable left side and an early fatiguing right side, which matches what we saw in the squat and deadlift. We also use Cossack style hinges to load the right hip in end range. Research shows that lateral and single leg exercises such as lateral step up and single leg squats produce high glute activation and improve pelvic and knee stability. Faris struggles to load into his right hip in this movement, which again aligns with the asymmetries that we see earlier. In this final deadlift video, we cue Faris to create a stable tripod foot by pressing the big toe into the floor. While no research directly links the cue to increased posterior chain activation, literature does support the role of the foot and ankle mechanics in improving squat and deadlift alignment under force transfer, which is something that I do encourage my clients to do. One study, however, has found that changes in foot mechanics influence joint loading, and after the interventions, Faris demonstrates improved bar path, better hip torso timing, and more evenly distributed pull. Moving on to George now, and in this clip, with George's squat, the limitation is clearly related to skill, not capacity. George initiates the squat by dropping straight down without a coordinated hip hinge. Because the hips do not initiate the movement, they end up rising second on the ascent. This creates an inefficient movement sequence where the knees take the load first, followed by the delayed hip extension pattern. This is a classic example of skill-based timing issue rather than a mobility or strength restriction. Here we compare an unweighted barbell rep with a loaded rep. Interestingly, George's loaded rep looks cleaner than his empty bar rep. This inconsistency is typical of a skill-limited mover. They rely on feeding the loads that organise themselves rather than having a stable, repeatable movement pattern. Even though the technique improves with weight, we still see a slight curve of the lumbar spine, showing that he hasn't fully mastered the trunk-hip coordination. If this were a capacity issue, we would expect the form to get worse under load, but here it is the opposite. To address George's limitations, we use a 303 tempo squat. This intervention forces the athlete to slow down the descent and maintain control through the bottom phase of the lift, which George struggles with. The purpose is to help him own the bottom of the position by improving his coordination, bracing, and awareness of hip-knee timing. Research supports tempo training for improving movement control and increasing time under tension, which enhances motor learning and potential awareness. By removing load and controlling speed, we target George's technique directly rather than his physical capacity. After the tempo squat intervention, we can see a clear improvement in George's squat pattern. His hip hinge is more coordinated, the descent is more controlled, and he maintains a more neutral spine throughout. The slight lumbar curve we saw earlier has reduced, showing that his bracing and positional awareness has improved. These changes can confirm George's limitation was skill-based because his movement improved significantly with technique-focused practice rather than mobility or capacity interventions. In George's baseline deadlift, we see a skill-based limitation. He struggles to create tension before lifting, meaning the bar leaves the floor before his body is set properly. His hips and torso rise at different times, and he doesn't maintain consistent control over the bar path. These issues indicate a breakdown in sequencing and bracing rather than a restriction in range or strength. With the annotations added, we can see technical inconsistencies more clearly. The hips rise slightly earlier than the torso, and the shoulders drift forward relative to the bar. The bar path moves away from the midfoot, which reduces efficiency. Again, this isn't because George lacks capacity, it's because he lacks the skill to maintain tension and coordinate the lift from the floor. To improve George's hip extension timing during the deadlift, we used a rub and punch glute bridge, which Faris is demonstrating here. This intervention increases awareness of how to drive the hips through while maintaining trunk stability. Research shows that bridge exercises produce high levels of glute activation and help improve lumbopelvic control, which is highlighted by Neto et al., which is essential for coordinated hip extension. We're not increasing his strength, we're improving his ability to sequence hip extension properly in a deadlift. After the intervention, George demonstrated a much more coordinated deadlift pattern. His hips and torso rise together, he maintains the bar close to his body, and the bar path is far more efficient. He also creates tension before lifting, which was missing earlier. These improvements confirm that George's issues were skill-based because correcting the movement pattern directly resulted in immediate visible progress.